Okay, recording. Accidentally click transcript. I don't think we need that. Okay. Hopefully it's showing the slideshow and me in the bottom right. Okay. Before I start, I have a prayer request for my friends David and Debbie Thompson. They went to Calvary many years ago, but they just got back like 2 weeks ago from their furlough in the States, and they're in Brazil in the middle west of Brazil, in the state of Bahia, Vitória da Conquista. And when they were going out from their church, um, they like a garage area, and then they pull out onto the street, and then they get out of the car to lock the gate. And everything there has like a wall in front of it. It's gated in, so they go out and lock the gate, and they go back in the car, and then the motorcycle pulls up next to them, and at gunpoint takes their car basically. So that happened last night, so Tuesday night. Um, so I just pray for that. It's good for them, and it's a sad situation. Um, pray that everything will work out with the insurance and stuff like that, and that it won't happen again. Um, and for them to get a parked car back because no, they don't have a car. Mode of transportation. They don't have a motorcycle, so thankfully they have a lot of friends there and a little bit of family. They have two of their children live there. One is a missionary that's helping them at that church, and another son who's living there. So they're all right, but just pray for them. They go through that emotionally and all the legal stuff they have to go through for insurance. So, um, my presentation, I'm going to start with Felix Manz. He only lived 29 years, um, but yeah, he didn't live that long because he was the first martyr. Because he was a martyr, he happened to be the first one of the Anabaptist Reformation. Um, that's the best picture I can find of him. His childhood, we don't know a lot about his childhood. We know he was born and he died in Zurich, Switzerland. He didn't move around. Um, he did go to school, and we'll learn more about what quick facts about him after this. But he followed Zwingli, which was a reformer. Um, followed him once he moved, probably out of his parents' house. We don't know where he moved, but resources say that he did move into a different area in Zurich, and that's when he started following Zwingli, 1519. Um, he was a Catholic until following Zwingli. His father was actually a Catholic priest. So his parents didn't consecrate him to be for the Catholic Church or anything like that. So we don't know what his life would have been like if it wasn't for Zwingli. Um, not sure what his job was, source of income, but we know that in his studies he learned Hebrew, Greek, and Latin really well. He hosted frequent Bible studies during his life, but by that I mean after he met Zwingli, actually, when he started Bible studies, first with Zwingli, and we'll see that more about that later. He was a zealous evangelist, and he was the co-founder of the Anabaptists. There's actually about 15 people who founded the Anabaptists, um, started that church. Today, this is a picture from Google Maps. Um, there is a school named after Felix Manz see, I can do a little laser pointer. There we go. Um, yeah, Felix Mann's school in Germany. It's pretty far from where he was, but he was in Zurich for his life there in Switzerland. Kind of funny that Switzerland, right here, he was there, but my family is actually from Bern, and we have religious connections, you could say, with Felix Manz, and from Bern, Switzerland was close to where he was. He had an impact on my family. This is United States, Kansas. Bern is the city right here. Close to the Nebraska-Kansas border. Here's Sabetha, might know that. It's close to, like north from Topeka, I guess. So Bern is like this tiny city that was formed just really because the railroad went through it, and a colony from Switzerland left Switzerland quite a while earlier than forming a city, but they ended up forming this city. Part of that colony was my family, and they named it Bern after the capital of Switzerland, which is pretty cool. That actually started in the 1880s. Bern did, um, and this colony of immigrants from Switzerland actually left Switzerland because of persecution, and they were Anabaptists. Um, so my most likely connection with disciples of Felix Manz and that group of 15 and their disciples. Um, just one thing to clarify is Swiss is what you would call someone from Switzerland. Let's see, where's my? There we go. Okay, like this. So that's Switzerland. So people from Switzerland call Swiss, and people from Sweden way up here would be called Swedish. I used to confuse that a lot, so I just want to clarify. So Felix Manz was Swiss. There we go. His time with Zwingli, he was a disciple of Zwingli in 1519, which is just a couple years after Luther nailed his 95 Thesis to the door of his church. Zwingli imposed practices like fasting, but purgatory, indulgences, veneration, and intercession of the saints, celibacy, the clergy. So, like, say you can't get married when you're in clergy, and monasticism. He did believe that salvation came by grace through faith alone. Um, he was one of the guys who um, started churches well, he didn't start churches, but he influenced people to not have music in the church. Before that, Catholic Church had a lot of music, and people who followed him didn't have music in the church. Um, he also believed that the state governed with divine sanction. So the state and the church work together, kind of like the Catholic Church was for a long time with the state. And this is just to show a comparison. This is where Luther nailed his 95 Thesis, and this is where Zwingli was way down in Zurich. So they probably might have heard about it, maybe didn't. They definitely knew about Luther, but later on in life. So the reason Felix Manz didn't stay with Zwingli is because of his belief with the church, working together with the state, kind of as one, but also infant baptism. There was a lot of people who still believed in infant baptism, and that for different reasons. Zwingli didn't necessarily believe that it was related to salvation, but it was basically something good to do for your kid. It is baptizing, whether it's a kid or just right when he's born. If the kid wasn't baptized or anything. So Felix and actually majority of Zwingli's disciples didn't like that because of their Bible studies. They regularly had Bible studies and kept on finding things that did not that weren't biblical, and they couldn't find a biblical foundation for. So they wanted to reform more than Zwingli did in these areas. So they separated from him. Um, Zwingli was actually a major leader in the city council. Another reason why he didn't leave, because that was his income. And yeah, so Felix Manz kind of studied the Bible, evangelized the community, um, but because of the separation, and because Zwingli was really firm on his stance, his beliefs, Zwingli um, pushed for rebaptism. So if an adult was already baptized, doesn't matter when, it's like most likely as an infant, as most people were. If later on he gets baptized again, um, Zwingli thought that that was like support of donatism. Donatism. So Zwingli was like, no way, that's saying that you don't believe in God, basically. So Zwingli pushed for that to be punishable by drowning. Pretty extreme, but um, yeah, he has his reasons. So Felix Manz, not saying that it's good, but Felix Manz and the city council had a lot of debates about rebaptism, but the city council constantly decided that Zwingli was the winner. Wonder why? Because it's part of the city council. Conflict of interest. But yeah, so it doesn't really matter what Felix would have said, he still would have lost. So on January 17, 1525, council demanded that they, like Felix and his friends were preaching that rebaptism um, was good, basically. That it was just a outward demonstration of someone's faith. Um, that they have their children baptized in 8 days. Um, However, they decided on the 21st during Bible study at Felix's house. Could have been Felix's mom's house. There's conflicting ideas there on resources. But either way, it was at Felix's house or his family's house. And they had Bible studies there. They decided, and after a lot of prayer, that they had no other option than to break with Reformed Church. So on a cold and snowy day, they went to a lake near the house and baptized each other. And that marked the beginning of the Anabaptists. Um, this group uh, of previously Zwingli's disciples, now they called themselves the Brethren, or we call them the Anabaptists. This group was inspired by Erasmus from a explanation from Anabaptist theology. Says that what they liked about Erasmus was that he promotes a simple ethical faith based on Jesus' example, while critiquing ecclesiastical hierarchy. So, like the church and the city working together, and like the church having more authority than it should, um, and theological complexity. Um, they were called Anabaptists, yeah, like I said, but they called themselves Brethren. Um, Felix Manz started teaching after this Anabaptist church started, despite them, the city council saying that they can't and that they need to baptize their kids. Um, Felix Manz and others started teaching, and he constantly went to jail for almost 2 years. Went to jail, but then once he got out, kept on preaching. Um, Finally, the last time he went to jail was December of 1526. So almost a full 2 years from 1525 in January. And the city council declared his fate. Um, his goal, though, during this time was to bring as many possible to follow the scriptures and obey Christ. There we go. So he was drowned because of his teachings on rebaptism. not because he didn't agree with the church and the city working together, just because of rebaptism. Mainly because Zwingli made that a law, that rebaptism was punishable by drowning. So Zwingli actually overwatched his drowning, which is pretty sad because Felix was Zwingli's old friend and disciple. So they, or he, not they, surprisingly just Felix. Not sure why, but Felix was more of a zealous evangelist, so he was the first one to get caught drowned. So at 3 p.m. on December 5th, 1527, Manz was led in chains through the city to the boat, kind of like Jesus, how he was led um, while carrying the cross to his death. Um, while Felix was walking in chains, a reformed minister accompanied him, trying to persuade him to recant. And at the same time, his mother and brother encouraged him to suffer for the sake of Jesus. When they tied his hands, well, so he went on the boat, and then they tied his hands over his knees, put a board through so that he couldn't move at all, his legs or feet, or legs or hands, and threw him over into the water. And his last words were, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." It's just like Jesus said before he died. Uh, so Felix, despite just having a little under 2 years of ministry as a member of the Brethren or Anabaptists, he made an impact through his zealous evangelism, evangelized a lot of different areas around Zurich, and his martyrdom. He didn't write um, books and stuff like that, or at least none of it survived today, except a couple of hymns that exist today. The Amish actually sing one of his hymns still. Not sure about everybody else, but I know it's in one of their books. Uh, he made disciples, taught them to seek truth in God's word instead of the church for truth. He helped separate the church from the government, and from his death, he and his influence at that time, the Reformation spread north um, from Switzerland up to where Menno Simmons was. And a few years later, that finally affected Menno Simmons. So Menno Simmons, next guy here, he did a lot more writing and was more influential. There's a lot more material about Menno Simmons than Felix Manz. Um, so he lived a lot longer of life, 1496 to 1561. He was a Catholic priest, unlike Manz, who wasn't. His father was, but he wasn't. Menno Simmons was not an Anabaptist founder, but he was a leader. So he got into the movement later, 10 years later, actually. And he focused on two simple things, which was practical holiness and the importance of the church in practical life. Um, instead of just being like a Christian, not going to church, not being involved. Um, he is way up here in the Netherlands, or modern day Netherlands. So, not sure how many miles that is, but it's a good ways. 9 years later, there were groups of Anabaptists in this area that Menno Simmons knew about. So, his childhood. He grew up in a poor peasant environment. Um, same thing like Felix, not a lot is known about his childhood. He got his last name from his father. That was custom. Um, to give father's first name to the son as his last name. So then his dad's name was Simmons. His parents consecrated men to service in the Catholic Church, which is why he was a priest. And that's why he also had preparation for that service. Like he was in the care of a monastery near his home. And that starts when he's young. when he was young. In his time in the Catholic monastery, he devoted himself to spiritual exercises, traditional course of theology, which wasn't it wasn't the same thing that you would get at like systematic theology or something like that at Calvary University. Wasn't as deep. He learned Latin and Greek, and he studied writings from church fathers. But he did fail to study the Bible. It is really sad. Um, and that's why people were misled by the Catholic Church because they didn't study the Bible. Not even the priests studied the Bible. So later he'll open the Bible and see what happened. So he was ordained in March 1524 when he was 28. So he did study for a while and work. He started reading the Bible 2 years later as a priest. The reason he didn't read the Bible before was because, well, first of all, he didn't take his priesthood seriously. He just kind of like, he didn't study much. He said himself that he joined his fellow priests in playing cards, drinking, and similar activities. So, not the most reputable guy as a priest. He didn't read the Bible because he was afraid that it would lead him astray. Isn't that funny? Not funny. It's really sad. So I don't know where that belief came from, but either way, whether it was from the monastery or not, he believed that the Bible would lead him astray. So that just gives you a peek of like how they viewed the Bible. They viewed the church as like the updated Bible, I guess you would say, what their beliefs, since the Pope was like Christ on earth almost with his authority. Um, so reading the Bible was like not necessary because church is already good. They're constantly updated by God, supposedly. Um, so when he did start reading the Bible, it was because he was curious and he wanted to know what the Bible talked about, what it was, where his beliefs came from. And in reading the Bible, he found that a lot of the beliefs were not biblical at all. And he didn't want to leave the priesthood um, because he wanted to fit in. He was afraid of persecution. He wanted to keep his good income. He was pretty rich as a priest, and it's an easy job. Just do your communion, do your infant baptism, and lead the Sunday morning meeting, and yeah, drink and play cards for the rest of the week. So he didn't want to lose that, just as sure no fleshly guy would. I wouldn't want to lose that if I was not a Christian. Um, this is where he grew up, this area, and he just stayed in this area for like almost his whole life. Um, yeah, he didn't move around much. He was a priest in Pinjam for 7 years. There we go. And then he was a pastor in his home village for 5 years. Um, and then at the end of his 5 years and Whitmer son, he was 40 years old. So he didn't, he was a priest at 40, but like he was, at 28. So he started at 28. He was here. Then he went here for 7 years. Then he went here for another 5 years. So at the end of that, he was 40. Um, so his conversion, he was convinced from his Bible reading that justification was by faith, not by anything else that the Catholic Church taught. Um, yeah, everything's good. Can't see some of it, but that's okay. So yeah, he disagreed with the Catholic Church for a while, like 5 years, since 1531. He um, made the decision that infant baptism was not legit, it's not from the Bible, so it could be still practiced. Same with transsubstitute. I forgot how to say it, but when the bread and wine become Christ's flesh and blood at communion, he didn't believe that either. But for these 5 years, he was living as a hypocrite, doing it, but not believing it. Um, so he kind of shows you his problem with fear. He was stuck in that for a while. One of the major things that he did was his disagreement with infant baptism. Um, he totally broke off from it. It's like Luther, Schweitzer, Bullinger, which were reformers. Of course, we know Luther is a reformer, but um, they argued in one way or another that infant baptism was still like biblical, it's a good thing to do. Not that it related to anything with salvation, but it was still like something good to do. But Menno was one of the first guys to um, completely break off from it. Um, so that pushed him out of the Catholic Church, got him into the circle of the Anabaptists. So yeah, the Anabaptists were one of the only ones who denied the need for infant baptism and based membership in the church upon a personal experience of salvation, of which water baptism was an outward symbol. So just a symbol of what has already happened inside, which is what we believe today. So the rest of Menno's life was just spent in these two areas. So he moved around a little more than Felix, but still in the same kind of area. He was on the run because of his belief. Um, he was the leader of the Dutch Anabaptists, which made him even more on the hit list. But yeah, he ended up ministering in Holland um, from 1536 to 1549, Northwest Germany in 1543 to 1546, so 3 more years, and Holstein from 1546 to 1561. Um, that's from a biography about him. So he was on the run because the king put um, basically put out an order to for anybody, if you see him, you need to kill him, and can't stay at his house and can't take care of him. So he really had a nice place to stay. He had a wife who was sick. We don't know what her sickness was, but she was sick, and he had 2 daughters and a son. Pretty rough for like just hanging around in usually just shacks. Um, so he, I already said the first point, he was a leader in the Dutch Anabaptists. He wrote a book, tract, or letter nearly every year between 1535 and 1558. And that's one of the reasons why we know a lot more about him, unlike Felix Manz, who was just an Anabaptist for under 2 years. Um, he was on the run. He ended up, despite the king and these leaders wanting to kill him, he ended up dying on his bed at, I think it was 65, 1561. And I don't know if you know this or not, but fun fact, Mennonites, where they get their, Menno is where they get their name, Mennonite, people from Menno. Um, just like people call themselves Lutherans or Calvinists. That is my slideshow. I really didn't expect right when I first started researching about these guys, I was like, I really don't know anything about these guys, and it's really hard to find information about them. So most of this information, if you wanted to learn more, I only found it in uh, one was a pretty brief biography of Manz that was in the collection of his works. So the editor, the collector, put his own biography at the beginning of that. And aside from that, everything was just from history of the Anabaptists, theology of Anabaptists, and different articles that mentioned the Reformation, or that were about the Reformation, that mentioned Manz. If you have any questions, do my best to answer, but I also did my best to get the most information I could for this and for my paper. So thank you for your time, and I'll be looking forward to your questions and what you learned.